Hello, my name is Rachel Haase, and I am a DNP student at Gonzaga University. And this is once again a educational video on inpatient adolescent psychiatry in terms of violence prevention. And the topic I'm covering today is adverse childhood experiences, trauma-informed care, and most significantly, what do we do? Which is fostering resilience. So, our thesis today is resilience can be promoted in all children. And that's a quote by Dr. Gordon Hodis, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist in Pennsylvania. Adverse childhood experiences. The focus of this video is really starting to make more connections with the behavior that we see on an inpatient adolescent psych unit and trauma. And so to start us off, we have the grand foundational piece of work, which is by Folletti et al., Relationship to Childhood Abuse and Household Dysfunction to Many of the Leading Causes of Death in Adults. And what this piece of research found is that when a child goes through adverse experiences, it's going to affect them their entire life. And on an inpatient psych unit, what you will see is many kids who have experienced a variety of adverse experiences. And most importantly as well, you're going to have kids who have gone through adverse childhood experiences and have no language or will refuse to talk about it. And so it's something that's always important to keep in the background. And Folletti et al. Brings us to what's currently happening, which is the trauma-informed care movement. And I am basing the trauma-informed care education today on a grand piece of work by Mr. Gordon Hodis, child and adolescent psychiatrist. And this document is Responding to Childhood Trauma, the Promise and Practice of Informed Care. Adverse childhood experiences. If you don't have a background in what this means, this website is a great place to start, and it's a great resource for providing some educational basics for parents and kids. So the first component of this is attaining an ACE score. And so each of these questions is an indication of if a person has had an adverse childhood experience, and they add up. And so it's possible to have 10 and it's possible to have 0. It's very common for kids who are admitted to an inpatient adolescent unit to have at least 1. And so you get an ACE score depending on how many adverse childhood experiences you've been through. The other thing to consider is that kids who come onto the unit may be going through these things and will refuse to acknowledge them or admit that they're going on. And so it's always important to keep looking for clues in terms of if a kid is going through adverse childhood experiences. Because the aim is that we can, as inpatient staff, provide kids education and perspective on what they're experiencing and what they have experienced in their life. We may not be able to fix things, but we can at least give them a new insight into their life. And so right here you can see that this big study done, that it is common for some people, like 15%, to have 4 or more. Men, looks like here in this study, had a little less, but you can kind of see how this study of 17,000 people kind of broke down in terms of how many adverse childhood experiences they had. So they're common, and they're even more common with patients who are admitted to a psychiatric unit. And adverse experiences correlate to a variety of negative lifelong health behaviors. So this includes alcoholism, and what you can see throughout these next graphs is the trend in which the people who have more adverse childhood experiences, so have a higher ACE score, have a higher likelihood of these negative unhealthy behaviors. So depression's another one. and antidepressant prescriptions. Your higher ACE score puts you at higher risk for perpetrating domestic violence, getting liver disease, smoking, later being raped in life, suicide attempts, promiscuous behavior as a teen, impaired work performance, greater risk of getting COPD. And there's a lot of reasons why. And another thing we're going to focus on in this video is the concept of toxic stress and how that really hurts a developing brain and sets people back. And then the other concept that I like that's included in this website is the resilience score. So one way that we can help kids address their adverse childhood experiences and kind of find some positive momentum is through identifying their strengths and what is making them able to be resilient and move on and engage in healthy life behaviors. So this is a really fun quiz to do with kids because it lets them identify things that are positive and that they can build on. Like they believed that their father loved them, or that people enjoyed them, or that they were independent. And those are all things that can help kids have healthy lives. So this is just one resource out of many, but it's kind of basic and comprehensive in a way to start. And here's ACEs Science 101 if you're interested. And ACEs in Action. This is a growing movement, and it's something that is absolutely worth getting involved with and learning more about if you're going to work with kids on an inpatient adolescent unit. Okay, this is probably the coolest resource I have discovered in my research, and it is something that is, once again, great as a staff member to understand and is also great to share with parents and families. And it is the Center on the Developing Child by Harvard University. And it once again builds on the adverse childhood experience concept in terms of what toxic stress means and the movement towards resilience for kids and families. So there's a lot on this website, and it is absolutely one where you could take a lot of time exploring it, and if you do have time, you should. But I'm going to show you a very brief video on toxic stress to further bring out this concept.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
As inpatient adolescent staff, you're going to have limited control over the child's environment and the child's future environments. The other thing worth considering is the stress that a child may experience if they have had a life of foster care, group homes, or residential treatment placements, where they may experience incredible amounts of stress there too, because they're not receiving the same amount of nurturing or the same type of nurturing that they would from two stable parents. And so those experiences can be stressful. And being in an inpatient environment can be very stressful as well. We are now going to revisit the work of Robert Sapolsky, who describes that chronic toxic stress psychologically means one is experiencing a constant sense of the loss of control and predictability. In terms of brain function, the most important thing to understand about a person who has had a life of toxic stress is the overactivation of the amygdala, aka they have an amygdala monster and it's wild and it's in control and it's the boss of this brain. And the other unfortunate dynamic is that toxic stress means that there is an extensive amount of stress hormones released through the body, and this absolutely affects brain development in terms of even the strength and function of neurons. It affects learning and memory, and it impairs maturation and function of the frontal cortex. And of course, it amplifies the amygdala monster. But in terms of all this stuff that's going on up here, the release of glucocorticoids and all the other effects of toxic stress, in terms of meaning that the kids can't go through the same type of healthy development, is that these neurons are gone. They're not working. They're not here. They're not even having a chance to even connect like they would in a normal adolescent brain, which is already impaired. So this function, this neuron function, is also really decreased at a whole new level. Here is our adolescent brain that has experienced toxic stress. Our frontal lobe neurons are weak, they're a mess, they're disconnected, and there's less of them than when comparing it to a healthy adolescent brain. And our amygdala monster is here all of the time. And what does this mean? This chronic stress, and stress in general, helps a person learn fear associations, but people are unable to learn how to extinguish their fear. So people are learning how to be more and more afraid, but at the same time, they're unable to learn how to get over their fears. And chronic stress is impairing the brain to make risk assessments, which is more frontal lobe activity. And it's decreasing the capacity to be empathetic. Another important thing to see in terms of where this amygdala monster is hanging out is it's hanging out in conjunction with key aspects of memory and hormone function. So all of these things are coming together in a way that negatively impacts a child's well-being. Here are some of the characteristics behaviorally that a child may exhibit if they have experienced trauma. They can be broken down by internalizing and externalizing behaviors. They may or may not be present. Everyone's experience of trauma is different, and everyone will express it differently. Here are some common beliefs of kids who have experienced trauma. It's worth considering when you're trying to understand a child's perspective, especially if their behavior is difficult or they are threatening violence or self-harm. Stress correlates with violent behavior. And Robert Sapolsky terms this displacement aggression. And that is to say, one way to reduce one's stress level is to be violent towards another, or another object, or something else. And this can be seen on a larger scale. When unemployment rates rise, there is an increase in domestic abuse and child abuse. This is really important to consider when a child comes from a highly stressed family where there may be economic concerns in terms of parents being unemployed or for whatever reason being unable to feed their children or pay their bills. Kids may observe displacement aggression in their homes, and they may choose to engage in displacement aggression in order to cope with their stress levels because it's what they've seen their parents do. Adverse childhood experiences is a terrible, heartbreaking aspect of working in adolescent psychiatry. And it's something that will continue to break your heart and will also be a reason for why kids are challenging. It's important to remember that it's partially due to this amygdala monster that they cannot turn off because they've experienced so much traumatic stress. And on top of it, their neurons in their frontal lobe is just bits and pieces of what a healthy child's brain should be. But the most important thing we can do is often just to be stubborn and refer back to our number one philosophy of this video. Resilience can be promoted in all children. We're going to watch a quick video that explains resilience.
Why do some people do well despite serious hardships? The science of resilience can help us find answers.
We define resilience as a good outcome in the face of adversity. The extent to which we can build capacities in all children early in their lives to be able to deal with whatever bumps in the road or major obstacles may be coming down the track. That's an investment in building strong human capital and healthy, productive adults.
Some children face more obstacles and adversity than others.
Like having a parent with a major mental illness, growing up in a very socioeconomically disadvantaged community, going to schools that are not good, being exposed to violence in the neighborhood or in the home.
But some children do well despite these significant obstacles.
Resilience is that ability or set of capacities for positive adaptation, allowing you to keep in balance.
We're talking about the kinds of capacities and skills and the abilities that give people a sense of mastery and management of difficulty.
It's tempting to think about children as either having this resilient quality or not, but resilience is built over time, just as and in parallel with how the architecture of the brain is built over time.
It's not just in the person, it's in the interaction between the person and the environment.
So we care about resilience for the same reason that we care about promoting healthy development, because in many respects it is the same. We are interested in promoting resilience in children so that, despite the odds, more and more children can grow up to be productive citizens.
So it's nice to think about some of these skills we're fostering in kids as muscles that they just need to start practicing and using and may not even know they have. So resilience is kind of a muscle. If you practice resilience, you can get better at it. And that's what the research shows. Another really crucial example to foster in kids is just emotional regulation. And emotional regulation is once again a muscle that you can think of that if practiced, they can come better at using. Resilience can be thought of as an ability or capacity, which, like a muscle, if it's practiced, will become stronger and we can use it more effectively. And it also can be understood as an effort of utilizing available resources. So, taking what you got in the moment and making the best of it. And third, it can be thought of as the potential for positive adaptation. What can we do as adolescent staff members to promote resilience, you ask? Well, one of the primary vehicles in which all therapy and intervention occurs is through relationship, therapeutic relationships. Not as a therapist, but just as a steady, calm presence. And things that are going to foster resilience in kids who have had adverse childhood experiences includes building respect and trust. A couple other characteristics to consider when trying to build a therapeutic relationship with a patient is being friendly, being non-threatening, being consistent with the patient's developmental level, basing the therapeutic context and everything on consistent and clear expectations and standards. Consider that shame and humiliation are big triggers for kids who've had traumatic experiences and may be a reason they feel a need to defend themselves and move forward with violent behavior. Keep working with the kid to understand their perspective of the problem and their situation. Another big thing we're going to go over really quick is what strengths do kids have that have gone through adverse childhood experiences? This is a basic list of common strengths of maltreated youth as presented by Dr. Haase. And the aim is to understand how kids can build on what's good and strong and positive in their life. And as adolescent staff members, we can help children build resiliency by identifying and reminding them of their strengths. Resilience is a naturally occurring phenomenon in human nature, and it shows us how, despite severe detriment, we can thrive. Well, thank you for watching this. It's in no means comprehensive of how trauma affects children in inpatient adolescent psychiatric units, but I hope it gives you some ideas of how we can move forward and help children who have had traumatic experiences. Resilience! The world is a wonderful, loving place. And as an adolescent inpatient psychiatric staff member, we can help children foster resilience in their life. Yes!